She thought she could control the street, her rules, her power. But one person dared to stand in her way. In seconds, her authority crumbled, not just in front of him but in front of everyone watching. The fight wasn't just about property. It was about truth, justice, and exposing a system that too often favors the loudest voice over what's right. What happens when someone decides that enough is enough, and no fake power can intimidate them? But this was only the beginning. The real story, the one that would shock an entire neighborhood, was about to unfold. It was a quiet afternoon, and Marcus had just returned from work, carrying groceries up the driveway he'd walked 1,000 times before. His neighborhood was familiar, almost comforting, the hum of distant lawnmowers, the occasional bark of a dog. But today, something felt off. Across the street, a woman appeared, clipboard in hand, moving with a confidence that didn't belong. Marcus barely had time to wonder who she was before she stepped onto his property. Her voice sharp, demanding, and full of authority he hadn't seen before. He froze, instinctively gripping the bags tighter, a mix of confusion and unease rising in his chest. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but the way she looked at him with judgment and control made it clear. This wouldn't be ordinary. Something in her tone hinted at rules that weren't his, rules that weren't fair. And Marcus had no idea how far she was willing to go to enforce them, or how high the stakes would climb. What he didn't know yet was that this encounter would unravel in ways he could never imagine, and it would change everything for him and his community. But as her eyes locked on him, Marcus realized, this was only the first spark. What would come next would ignite a storm that no one on the street could ignore. Marcus set down his groceries, hoping to ignore the tension, but the woman wasn't going anywhere. She stepped closer, clipboard shaking slightly, yet her voice rang with authority that wasn't hers. "You can't park there. That's against HOA rules," she demanded, her eyes scanning the street as if daring anyone to back her up. Marcus blinked, confusion colliding with disbelief. "Ma'am, I live here," he said, voice steady but cautious. Her laugh was sharp, almost cruel. "Not anymore. You're violating every rule. I'm calling the board and the police." Her phone whipped out of her pocket like a weapon. Panic prickled at Marcus's chest, but he forced calm. There was something off in her swagger, something desperate hiding behind the fury. As neighbors began to peek from windows and driveways, Marcus realized the showdown was already public. The woman's authority thrived on spectacle, on making him feel small, but he refused to crumble. He straightened, lifting a hand to stop her mid-threat. "Before you call anyone, you might want to check the property records. The deeds. They're all in my name." Shock flickered across her face, tiny and fleeting, but her voice remained loud. "I'm not afraid. The HOA will make you." Marcus allowed himself a small, controlled smile. "You might want to check again. I bought the whole street last month. The HOA doesn't exist here anymore." A hush fell over the crowd. Her plan was faltering, the performance cracking under the weight of reality. Phones appeared, recording, capturing every tremor in her voice. Panic replaced bravado, and for the first time she faltered. Desperate, she summoned backup, or what she thought was backup. 2 men in uniform approached, marching with authority. Marcus's heart beat faster, but only with heightened awareness. Something didn't add up. Their expressions betrayed them. Confusion, hesitation, recognition of their own charade. "Funny," Marcus thought, "you seem confident, yet I've got proof." He held up a folder thick with deeds. The men froze, eyes darting between him and her. Commands faltered. Threats hung useless in the air. She barked at them to enforce the rules, but the illusion of power collapsed like fragile glass. Neighbors whispered, some gasped, others quietly filmed. Marcus stepped aside, letting every camera capture the unraveling spectacle. He could almost feel the tension crackle like lightning across the street. Each second stretched, heavy with the knowledge that her authority was not just questioned, it was destroyed. Then came the final taunt. Marcus casually drove his truck halfway into the street, blocking her path, an unspoken message clear. This was his ground, his rules, his reality. She froze, trapped by circumstance and by truth. The crowd held their collective breath, witnessing her unraveling performance. And just as she scrambled for another desperate move, Marcus realized. This confrontation was far from over. The next steps, the ultimate revelation, would hit harder than anyone, herself included, could imagine. But the question lingered in the charged silence. How far would she go to reclaim a power she never truly had? The tension snapped like a live wire. Marcus stood his ground as the woman lunged, voice rising into a scream that echoed down the street. Her clipboard shook violently, her threats slicing through the air, but they no longer carried weight. Every eye on the block was on her unraveling act. Marcus held up the folder of deeds, letting the sun catch the paper in sharp glare. "Everything here," he said slowly, "is mine. Every inch of this street belongs to me." Her face drained of color. Her phone slipped from her hand as she scrambled for some imagined backup, dialing frantic numbers that went unanswered. The two faux officers froze, their uniforms meaningless now under the weight of proof. The neighbors murmured, whispers swelling into sharp, accusing voices. Marcus's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the fire of justice finally catching up. Then came the moment that would seal it. The first real sirens in the distance, approaching fast. Her panic spiked. She staggered backward, muttering about authorities and lawsuits, but Marcus raised a hand, calm and deliberate, holding the deeds and recordings high. "Every threat, every fake notice, every lie you whispered about this street is recorded. Public record now." The crowd gasped collectively, the weight of truth pressing down on her like a tidal wave. Her authority, false, fragile, manufactured, crumbled completely. She took a desperate step forward, trying to snatch the folder, but Marcus sidestepped, smooth and unshakable. Phones were raised, cameras rolling, every neighbor witnessing her defeat. The air crackled with tension, a mix of shock, relief, and triumph. Marcus's chest rose and fell steadily, each breath a reminder that standing firm against injustice could rewrite the rules of power. The woman's voice faltered, shrill and small, her grand performance reduced to trembling words. And just when it seemed she might attempt one last move, Marcus's calm, unwavering presence stopped her cold. The street held its breath, the moment stretching taut. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about truth, courage, and exposing lies for the world to see. And in that charged silence, one question hung heavier than any threat. Could she ever reclaim control after this? The chaos finally settled. The woman, her authority shattered and lies exposed, retreated from the street, leaving behind her clipboard, her phone, and the false power she had clung to. Marcus stood among neighbors whose faces reflected relief, awe, and a quiet satisfaction. The street, once tense with fear of arbitrary control, now hummed with a sense of freedom. A freedom earned not through force, but through patience, preparation, and the courage to stand for what was right. He gathered the deeds and recordings, not for revenge, but to protect his community from future injustice. In that moment, the fight wasn't just about ownership of property. It was a fight against intimidation, false authority, and the subtle ways prejudice and power can try to dominate lives. The neighbors whispered among themselves, some filming, some simply nodding, all silently acknowledging that truth had prevailed. Marcus realized that standing up wasn't just about winning a street. It was about setting a precedent, proving that courage and integrity could dismantle lies and intimidation. The lessons were larger than him, about fairness, justice, and the courage required to face systems that seek to suppress others, often along invisible lines of bias. As he closed the gate and walked back toward his home, sunlight glinting off the neighborhood, one truth lingered. Power can be misused, authority can be faked, but truth, solid, undeniable truth, has a way of prevailing. The street was safe, the neighbors protected, and justice, finally, was visible to all. But the question remained for everyone watching this story unfold. In a world still riddled with injustice, how far are we willing to go to protect what is right, and to stand up when someone tries to take it from us?